Okay, so for the last session of the day, I've got a lot of post-it notes here. I've got some other questions, and we are having a panel discussion on maximising spray application in your paddock. For this session, I will welcome back to the stage Professor Chris Preston, Mary O'Brien and Professor Steve Powles, and I'd like to welcome to the stage Justin Crosby, who's from CropLife. Now, I've just got a little bio to introduce you, Justin, so just bear with me. I've got to turn my post-it page very carefully. Justin is the Director, Government and Strategic Relations at CropLife Australia. Prior to working at CropLife, Justin worked at the Grains Research and Development Corporation and New South Wales Farmers. Justin, great to have you here. Can we give him a round of applause and welcome him up to the stage? So, Justin, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to throw it open and let's talk MRLs. So, MRLs are critical factors in gaining access to export markets. Can you explain a bit about the tolerance of countries when it comes to MRLs and the impacts on markets if we don't get it right?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. If we think about MRLs, essentially they're one of the outputs that we get from the science-based process that the APVMA work through when they register chemistry. So they look through in terms of firstly thinking about human health and safety and what's good agricultural practice in Australia. And they also then think about what's the issues with regards to our trade. So we're one of the few countries in the world where our regulator actually thinks about trade impact. And that's because the statute itself says, how will this impact our trade? Or more to the point, how do we use chemistry to improve productivity for the object of increasing our trade and our international competitiveness? So it's a really critical thing. And if we don't think about how does that work, again, as we've discussed a number of times, we have control of use arrangements that mean we need to follow the strict scientific risk management arrangements that the APVMA have put on a label. And the reason for that is to manage those risks. When I was working at New South Wales Farmers and I was new to the grains job, and there was a young Gary Hansen, at the GPSA table, a very infant organisation in those days. I remember sitting on a call where we had a cargo that was loaded out of WA going to Western Australia with noodle wheat in it, and it had immigraine residues in it. And we ended up with a process where that ship had to be brought back to Australia so they could manage the risk associated with it, which costs the growers in the end, because the additional cost of turning that ship around, unloading it, as well as, potentially had it gone even further to Japan into the market, we'd have a trader that probably would have lost a market. So ultimately, the actions that are on your farm are critical in terms of how do we manage the markets that we need, because essentially that's how you get paid. So we need to maintain not just the productivity part, but we need to connect with the consumers and particularly the regulatory requirements that they may have upon their imports.
Thanks, Justin. And building on from that, one of the questions we had on the post-its was big picture. What's happening in Europe and what do we need to watch out for?
Lots happening in Europe. I had an email exchange with Warwick Ragg, who's at the National Farmers Federation, when they had riots the other week. He thought he particularly liked the ripper going across the road, but I don't think that would work here in Australia. Look, if we're to look at the directions of Europe, for the last 5 years, so since the current Parliament and Commission were commenced, they've been down this track of what they've called the Green Deal, which had the farm to fork arrangements in it. And to be fair, whilst it's looking at this ambition of Green Deal, the reality is the results of it would be catastrophic. So they talked about halving fertiliser use, 20% of fertiliser use, halving pesticide use, and increasing organics to 25%. There's been a whole bunch of modelling that was done on that showed it would reduce European food production by 12%. That's all good. That actually equates to roughly 1% of the world's food and would have a resultant impact of increasing food pricing at commodity level by 9%. As well as just this small thing about an extra 22 million people going into severe food insecurity. So it would have been a disastrous outcome. Now, fortunately, there's been a bit of a pause that's been associated with that, and that pause is around essentially Europeans realising that they've had great overreach and that it would cause problems. And to the credit of some strong farming organisations and some of the centre-right parties in Europe, that's had a stop. So we're really waiting to see what happens after they have elections and they form a new commission at the in June this year. That will kind of determine what's happening. The tea leaves I'm reading kind of says that, look, we're bound to see a Green Deal or a farm to fork strategy come back in some aspect, but we expect that it will be probably a little more cognizant of the realities of farming. I say that not to take the pressure off what we do on farm, because again, there's a whole range of other risks that we face in terms of trade. But what we have seen is some of the political processes which would have created a green famine have been stalled. How do we continue to work in a multilateral way with our trade partners to make sure that science is what determines what farmers can use, because that's how we'll feed the world. It's also how we'll feed the world safely.
Thanks, Justin. Steve, what do you think?
Can you hear me?
Try again now, Steve.
You figure it out, young fella. What Justin has said, of course, all makes sense. But like I said, I'm retired. I can say whatever I like. The Europeans, and many of us have got European heritage, they've lost the plot in these areas. They have seriously lost the plot. They're making some silly decisions. If you look at what they're going to do for weed control, for example, it's a recipe for the use of the moldboard plough. In other words, we won't use chemicals, we'll use a moldboard plough. You know what a moldboard plough is in an Australian soil type, in an Australian environment? It's like an atomic bomb going off in the soil. If you want to talk about things being destructive, a moldboard plough is 100 times more destructive than the use of some of the agricultural chemicals that we use. So Europe is not a good example for us. Yes, it's a wonderful continent and it's got wonderful buildings and lots of things to recommend it, but their attitudes in agriculture and the way that politics have influenced, with all these tiny little countries, influence their policies when it comes to chemicals. What was that word you used? Bullshit. There's a lot of bullshit in all of that, ladies and gentlemen. They're not a good example. The EPA, the US Environmental Protection Authority, is the best example. The Canadian regulator. That's also the agriculture that is most similar, along with good old Brazil and Argentina. Those are the countries that we are more closely aligned with from a farming perspective, and it's to those that we should look and hope that the US Environmental Protection Authority remains the sensible, science-based decision maker that it is.
I couldn't agree, further in terms of that. You just said it more colourfully, I think, to a degree there. That's what happens when you're a professor. You get to use more colourful language. But it also comes down to what's our settings in terms of trade policy, and so how do we ensure that our government, and to be fair, our government does take this view, and that is, how do we use science not just to determine our agricultural policy, but how do we use science to determine our trade policy? And there's a couple of trade agreements, things like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, that basically has set down at the ministerial level that we shouldn't have unscientific barriers to the trade of food, because that's what causes people to starve, and it tends to be the most impoverished in the world that starve because of that.
Comments from you, Chris. Did you want to comment as well, Mary?
Well, I think I'll make a few comments. That one of the things that we've seen over the last 20, 25 years in Europe is that they are seriously moving to a situation where they are making it harder and harder for their farmers to use products effectively, because they've reduced the number of products that are available. So they're basically, I think, one fungicide away from having just major issues with cereal. So, our response sitting here in Australia is that if we're selling product into that marketplace, it's not so much our rules that we've got to meet, it's their rules we're going to have to meet. So we do need to be cognizant of what we're doing. We can sit here, and I can stand here and say, look, it's all complete rubbish. But if they ban glyphosate use and take away the MRL, like they've done with haloxyphol, we're going to lose a whole bunch of uses of glyphosate that we can put on crops because we won't be able to sell them to Europe. So in the big picture thing, I think we need to be aware that these currents are happening around the world. And rather than standing up and saying, look, it's all bullshit, I think we need to be working and demonstrating that, look, some of this is okay, you can do that. We'll just demonstrate that we can work within those parameters by doing things right. And I look at it as, say, the best thing we can do when we've got these sort of rumblings happening about things that might happen is that if we don't cause any problems, then we won't actually get into a situation where everybody says, yeah, we were right, we really need to ban that stuff. So, you know, in a lot of ways, we do actually have in our own hands the ability to deal with some of these international things that are going on. It will be that some products we're just going to lose. I mean, you know, chlorpyrifos was an example that's been raised. It got to the point where, well, really, couldn't really see how we could keep that in that system and run within the rules. But there are other products where we can certainly defend their use if we use them wisely. And one of the things that's happening at the moment is that the review of paraquat that's been going on, for 19 years now, I think, is now going to be finalised. And that'll almost certainly, I believe, see some losses of use patterns. Probably not for you guys, though. Probably not for Broadacre, because it's all about operator safety. Okay, and we've shifted from where we were 20 years ago, where it was all slapdash, to people having, you know, enclosed cabs. It's all in envirodrums and shuttles, and we're not touching the stuff. So I think we're probably going to be okay, but I think we'll probably see some losses of uses in some other sectors. And this will be a continuing thing for us for products where they are either perceived to be or demonstrated to be dangerous. And I think the comment I made earlier in comment to what Peter Cousins asked about which of the products are going to be really high on the target. I'm saying people are targeting glyphosate, but I don't think we're going to lose that because it's really hard to demonstrate that it's dangerous. But we've got a lot of other products where it's actually really quite easy to demonstrate they're dangerous, and if we don't use them right, we can lose them.
Thank you. Mary?
That crazy European attitude is very alive and well here in this country. One of the fun things I do is take about 100 environmental and town planning students out to cotton farms. So, of course, they're anti-chemical, anti-GMO, anti-bloody everything. And so they come with the problem, and I go to them and say, well, what's your answer? And they don't have one. And so I say to them, well, we need pesticides, we need GMOs, because by 2050 the world population is going to double. We're going to have to knock down all the trees, and we're going to have to start shooting people. Do you want to pick a team?
Mary, while you've got the mic, I'm actually going to ask you another one. So you've said publicly that when you've raised spray drift in the past with farmers, you've been yelled at a lot. Why do you think it is such a sensitive issue for farmers, and has that attitude changed in recent years?
Yeah, it is. It's a very emotional topic, a very emotive topic. I think the other thing that comes into play is that when we question people's practices, it's a pride thing as well. So people are very proud of, farmers are proud of what they do, and they truly believe they're doing a good job. And I think that's where I talk about that community drift, that tiny little bit. Like, everyone's trying to do a good job. Yes, there are a few cowboys, but I think it's that pride thing where people get quite offended. And I guess more so in my regulatory role, when I had a groovy badge where I could come in and kick the door down and say, show me your records, and pull up spray rigs, and I'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and drive out to the Darling Downs and pull up spray rigs and say, mate, what's in your tank? I'll just glyphosate. It's like, all right, then you won't mind if I take a sample. Yeah, all right, there might be some 2,4-D in there. So it's that pride thing. And again, having a regulatory badge, you get yelled at a lot. But it's finding that education and how can I help you to do a better job. because I believe that most farmers want to do a better job, and so that's why I want people to always be learning, always learn something new. And I think Leet made a good point earlier about have these conversations. The people who are here, to use Bill Gordon's terms, the reachable and the teachable, take that information away and teach it to other people, but don't wait till your neighbour is being a dickhead and ring up and tell him then. Do it over a barbecue, do it at kids' sports. Say, listen, I went to this thing the other day and I learned this, this and this. Did you know that? Did you know that there's a mesonet? Did you know this? Do that education in a passive way rather than wait till you want to kill him.
And one more while you've got the mic. We had a post-it, a blue post-it, which says, penalties for inappropriate spray use, to be stronger, ?
The penalties are there. I'm not sure what it is in South Australia, but every state regulator has the penalties there. The issue is actually getting it over the line and proving it. So that's the difficult part. And it was talked about earlier, I'm not sure whether Chris or someone spoke about the labels and enforcing the labels and the label rates and stuff. So our regulators tend not to be experts on nozzles and droplets and inversions and stuff, but most of them can read a label. And so that is the easiest thing for them to prosecute, is failure to comply with the label.
So I'll pass that open to yourself and the rest of the team, because this post-it is very complementary to the blue one, is where to next to enforce best practice?
I'll have a go, and as a regulator, you can probably, or a former regulator, you can jump in. But the reality is, best practice is, or compliance is actually about behaviour. And behaviour has a number of drivers. And when you look at, go to regulatory workshops and they put up a nice little pyramid that sort of says, here's how you need to spend your effort. And at the base, it's how do you do these things? How do you make sure people actually understand how to do the right thing? Because there are people that just won't know. And then at the top of the pyramid, they've got, how do you take them through the ringers at the court? And that costs a lot of money and takes a lot of effort, so you don't do that a lot. And in between, you have a whole range of things like, how do I be present, or how do I create peer efforts, as we've seen from GPSA. So the whole process here is, how do you normalise what is good behaviour, and then how do you back that up with peer pressure, advertising, behavioural economics, a graduated regulatory response where sometimes it's just throwing a ticket at someone or seeing, I think, lights and dust, I think is how you said it on the phone the other day, Mary, to occasionally just picking someone and taking them to court, because that creates a deterrence and an understanding that that's unacceptable to your industry, but it's also unacceptable by the law.
Yeah, and we do talk a lot about social licence, and it's one of the things I bang on a lot about. The other side of that coin, I guess, is the social conscience. Like, we can demand that social licence or have to respond to the social licence, but as operators and applicators, we have to have a social conscience that one of the decisions in spraying is, I'm not spraying today because it's shit conditions. So it's having that social conscience as well to respond to the social licence.
Thank you. I'll hand over to another one of our questions that's come through, and I've had two which have come through around ChemCert training. There's some questions around, is the training relevant and up to date? Is it a little bit out of touch? And then there was one which said that, why isn't the content of Andre and David's presentation a core component of every ChemCert equivalent course? So talk us through any thoughts on ChemCert. I know this is,
Any ChemCert trainers here? Would like to come up and deal with that. I think that, from my perspective as an expert in herbicides and how herbicides work, there's really no way that in a 1 day or 2 day session, that you've got 1 day now, that I could upskill you guys sufficiently that you would have all the expertise that I hold. So I think that's what we should see with ChemCert training. It's probably that base level training. Farmers, I think, really probably should be looking out for opportunities to get more information and more training so that they become better operators. Because, ChemCert's got to cover everybody, and it's like teaching, first-year university students. They come from all over the place, so you start at the dumbest level and work your way up. And ChemCert, sadly we're down in that low level, and that's part of our problem. There are some things that could go into their training that aren't. There's probably some new information that we've gathered in the last decade or so. That's it always takes time for these things to turn up in teaching. I'm a university lecturer. I'm aware that things happen and I don't actually talk about them for a couple of years after they've happened. So sometimes this new information takes a bit of time to get through. So I think that there's opportunities, and I talked to one of the training organisations last year about some things that were happening in Broadacre, particularly around use of pre-emergent herbicides that they might, and they all went, we want to get some of this in our training program, because we're still dealing with stuff that was 15 years ago. So there are, I reckon we could make some changes, but ChemCert's not going to fix it for us, because it's that first level of training.
I'm heading over to our friend here from ChemCert training. Do you want to make a little comment?
Thank you very much. I can't talk on behalf of the whole industry, but I can talk about the company I work for, which is called ChemCert. I had a dozen broadacre farmers from Bordertown in a room on Tuesday. I had a dozen rangers from Bel-Air National Park with me yesterday, so I'm going to be training 1 or 2 days a week. We try and keep up to date with that course and update it at intervals. The sort of stuff we've been putting out today about spray drift, a lot of that is built into the course that I ran the last 2 days. The video that you were shown earlier on spray drift, there's another one that follows that, filmed 4 or 5 hours later in the day. The guys get to see all that information and the implications of where we're going. And I'm talking really just around the spray drift part of the course. So we try and keep it really up to date. In an 8-hour day, which is what the guys had yesterday and the day before, there is a limit to what you can do. And the federal government tells us a lot of what goes into the course. So 2 or 3 years ago, the course included an animal health section. Now, government says we don't need that. Everybody knows what they're doing with livestock, so we don't have to have that in the course. We used to talk about poisons. No, you don't need that in the course, to leave that out. So some of the things we do and don't have in the course are actually stipulated for us. It's then up to our organisation to produce a course that satisfies ASQA as well as making sense to people in the field. Are we perfect? I'm sure we're not, but we're really trying to keep up to date.
As a previous ChemCert trainer for a short time.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great response, and thank you for the work that you do too.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to hear they've taken the animal health side out of it. That's because there was a very difficult day to cover everything from 1080 baiting through to 120-foot boom spray. Like, that's just impossible, irrelevant. And my standard line is, it covers more of the OH&S stuff than the actual spray application stuff. And I tend to say, and I can say this because I used to teach it, that it will teach you not to drink the shit. That's it. So as for complicated broadacre spraying, I don't think it's the answer.
I think it is. Someone in a former life had to read a whole bunch of regulatory impact statements for pesticide training. The big problem here is that when you apply a cost burden across industry, it looks quite high, and so you've got your little bureaucrat with the boffin hat on. Sorry, Michael, wherever you are. And it adds up to a really big number, and it scares politicians off. But I think the way that we need to think about this as an industry is it is the baseline, and how do we actually continue to want to be the best industry we can be? How do we want to continue to strive for higher and better? How are we putting in place management systems that mean that the workers that we've got on tractors actually have some parameters that you'll support as their managers, as their employers? So again, how do we look higher and better, and how do we encourage people to get along to days like today around that? Because regulation can also create perverse outcomes. Regulation can create deliberate disobedience, and so that's that problem in terms of the requirements for a very base level training. It's there to actually essentially make sure that someone doesn't drink the shit.
Doesn't drink the shit.
But then how do we strive for better as an industry? And that's how do we take it up on our own bat and actually strive to do better?
Yeah, so it's a requirement in New South Wales that all applicators have chemical user accreditation training, yet New South Wales has the worst drift in the country. So it's working.
Simon Maddox, Chair of Primary Producers SA, semi-retired, so maybe that means I can semi-say whatever I think, but I still have obligations. Look, I think this is a really important issue because, and this is not about ChemCert because that's a brand name and I don't want to dump on ChemCert. They do what the system says they need to do. But we as an industry could take a lead on this and say this is what we want for our industry. And the problem is ChemCert is base level. They always, what's that saying, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept or something. If we want it to be better, we should say we need it to be better. Gun laws in this country have multiple levels of licensing, and the more high-powered, aggressive weapon you want to use, the higher level of standard of training you have to have. We probably should be doing the same thing in our chemical training. Yes, it's regulation, but the reality is people need to be brought to a minimum standard. And the other challenge at the moment is you only need that formal qualification to purchase the chemical. You can let anybody in your property go out and spread the stuff. There ought to be a minimum standard that anybody applying also has to have a certain minimum level of licensed accreditation. So I think there are some things that we as an industry should stand up, not wait for government to tell us this is what it needs to be, stand up and say this is what we as an industry want to take on board and accept as a minimum and drive it, because it's an important part of education and clearly a lot of people are not getting even the minimum stuff.
Yep. I'm totally not against education and training at all. However, as a primary producer, I have a bloke comes on farm, he can't get in the spray rig till he gets trained. I have to pay him for a couple of days to go training. A month later, he pisses off and works for someone else. I've just invested, and that's shit. So how do you avoid that? So if we can find something that works, because that's why producers are not wanting to put their blokes through that training, because that's what happens.
I think the last point I'd have on this, and you make a really interesting point here around, you know, the regulation requirements, and we don't have a uniform control of use in Australia. You know, we've had a federal Department of Agriculture that, as long as I've been working in, you know, the crop protection space, which goes back to 2010, has been charged with trying to work with the states to do that. And to be fair, the federal department has continued to fail to find ways around that will incentivise states to give up the lollies. So we need effort here in terms of, firstly, to your point, Simon, how do we as industry, not just GPSA, but industry through your peak bodies such as, you know, GPA, and I know grain growers also are in this space in terms of the grains industry, to have a harmonised view on this so that you can go at those different layers at the state level and also at the political level and demand better from the Department of Agriculture.
I just want to get in on that discussion a little bit, and once again, I'm not targeting ChemCert in it, but if you actually ask the people in this room, why do you get your ChemCert accreditation or re-accreditation? The answer I always get is, I have to do it every 5 years, and without it, I can't pick up my S7 plant protection products. I have never, ever heard anyone say, I'm going to a ChemCert course to learn about the best practices of spraying.
But yet we had, and talking to the FMC people, they had 130 farmers in 3 events in this state in the past 2 weeks, I believe. So, you know, no one was required to go to that room, but there were growers and there were workers working in the agriculture industry that said, I want to do better. And I think that's the culture that we need to work towards. And yes, the regulation needs to kind of be around there, but I do think we need to be really careful about trying to raise the kind of the base here. But what we need to do is how do we work towards having management processes that essentially ensure that the behaviours on farm prevent drift. And that's what we need to aspire to.
Yeah. If I can just go back and clarify something. Unless I'm mistaken, in this state, if you want to buy or apply Schedule 7s, you must have a ChemCert certificate. However, The only thing anybody can police is your purchase. So you have to have a ChemCert certificate to go and purchase it. The fact that your worker on the farm is not accredited and sprays spray seed is an offence. So the law is there to cover that. It's simply that you can't police the exercise. The other thing is there is a level of course at AQF2 which says this person can work under supervision. So there are 2 levels of course run in various parts of the country. My company at the moment only runs AQF3, which is what the vast majority of these people are doing. But there is an AQF2 which enables you to employ somebody who drives the tractor, but you tell them this is the amount of chemical you put in this drum and this is how you spray it. And so there are 2 levels out there that will cope with that.
Thanks for clarifying that, Mark. Okay. So there's some actions there, perhaps for PPSA, GPSA. So I'm going to leave that for you to, I've seen you taking some notes down, so add that to the next meeting list, I think. Okay, another thing, well, this is, I think, a really good question and a topic for us to move on to next. This question says, as a consultant, how do I best guide growers towards best spraying practice and record keeping if not currently compliant? Advice to growers also needs to be realistic. So we've got a lot of advisors and agronomists in the room. What would you say?
Well, I mean, there are a range of ready to pick off the shelf free resources that are available. So, for example, CropLife runs our Stewardship First, and if you Google Stewardship First, you'll actually get that range of resources. But I also know, from my time at GRDC working with Gordon, that that there's some resources that they have. So there are quite a few around, and I think it's worth noting that again, like talking about stewardship, which is essentially this: how do we do this thing better? Like, there's massive investments across industry. Globally, all of my big members spend over $90 million a year in stewardship and product monitoring. And I think if we were to take the work that is done at the farmers level, that's going to be higher again. So again, how do we tell that good story about the investment that we make as an industry in being better, but that's got to be then matched with the practice so it's demonstrable?
I think certainly from the regulatory point of view and for getting growers up to speed on farm, it is literally, if your practices are called into question and you have to defend yourself in a court of law, pretty much the only thing you get to rely on are your records. So the better your records, the better your defence, the better. And these cases often take a long time to get to court, sometimes 7 years. Now, I don't know if you can remember what you were doing on the 4th of April 7 years ago, but I bloody well can't. So the better your records, the better your defence. And it is, honestly, it doesn't hurt. And the little bit down the bottom of the spray record where it says, comments, that's your cover your ass section. That's where you write, I pulled up because the wind changed, or the inversion set in, or I changed setup, or whatever. Write something in there. Be able to produce those records. Another hot tip, I know Pers is in the room, I'm going to tell you anyway. If they come knocking at your door and demand your records, I assume the legislation in this state would be the same as the others, that the legislation says that an inspector can request your records, and that usually is followed by within a reasonable time frame. So if you say you can have them in 6 months, that's not a reasonable time frame. If you say, here, have them now, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably send them to me and get me to check them for you first, but don't give those records to anybody else except your state regulator. This is the undoing of most people, is that they provide those records to the neighbours or somebody else, or a crop loss assessor, insurance company. You are not required by law to provide those records to anyone except your state regulator.
Michael, is that true? Before you leave, I saw you sneaking out. Did you want to comment on that before you go? You might have something on, but just in case. Yeah, eagle eye over here.
I'm in trouble walking out now. No, Mary's right, really. So yeah, the records, yes, we can certainly ask them as the regulator, and we certainly will ask to see them and look at them, but you don't need to be giving them to anybody else, no.
Can I ask you one more quick question before you go? Then I can tick off a post-it. How can we get PIRSA to have a more intimidating presence on farm, such as the pressure of not wanting to drink and drive being the same as spraying in an inversion? Any thoughts there from you?
Just a good question. I think I probably won't answer that directly, but indirectly, I think the message has been really loud and clear from industry, and it has changed across the last sort of 10 to 12 years. There's an expectation, particularly from PIRSA as the regulator, to have that presence on farm, and for that presence to be, you know, more than just educational. There's an expectation that we do, I guess, as a regulator, potentially make examples of people who are really doing the wrong thing. So, and I think that's changed, and we've talked about sort of the change across the time, sort of moving from education, which we still certainly need, and we still need to have a strong focus on, because all those tools in the toolbox, and regulation is one of them, and we certainly need to be able to show that we're having a stronger presence, and it's something we've been talking about with GPSA and the other industry groups about how we're going to do that. So for PIRSA, it's absolutely a priority for us to be out there more, and for us to, I guess, use our powers to make sure that people who are doing the wrong thing are held to account for that.
Thanks, Michael. As you were, you're welcome to stay, but if you have to sneak off, thank you for taking the time there. That was great.
I thought you were going to ask Michael if he's going to start taking steroids and lifting weights to become more intimidating there, Bill.
Well.
He probably has a provision under the legislation to call anyone to his aid. Get my number. I'll come and give you a hand. So, under the legislation, they can require anyone to assist them, and it's an offence for me to refuse.
So just double checking, we diverged just for a little bit, but were there any more tips for the consultants out there on how to get their growers compliant? Steve?
Oh, I would just say to the crop consultants, in my long experience, unfortunately, farmers and some consultants do not always strictly follow the label. I think many of you would agree that's a factual statement. Chris, I'm sure you've been in front of audiences many times, as I have, where you are asked to comment on an off-label use. And my answer is, you shouldn't do that. And there's a general twitter in the room, a laughter, as if, well, that's just the regulations. If we can use this and it works, then we should use it. So I would say to the crop consultants, start off by setting a very good example yourself. Don't make any recommendations that are not fully on label, and encourage your farmer clients to only use label rates and label chemicals. Now, some of you are thinking, has he lost the plot? That's not the way we do things, but that is the way we should do things. That, as has been said a number of times today, there is a huge amount of work that's gone into deciding what the label is, what it's registered at, what the rate is. Some of those things are quite complex and may involve trade and other matters that you may not be fully aware of. So the simple and best thing is never make recommendations that aren't according to the label, and encourage your clients to do the same. And that might seem very logical and sensible, and that every crop consultant in the country does that. Well, they don't. There are farmers who use off-label chemicals, and they shouldn't, and there are some consultants who make off-label recommendations because they perceive it's in their interest of their business, and they shouldn't. In my view, we should stick to those just as the same as it's a good idea in this country to drive on the left-hand side of the road. And if you choose to drive on the other side, there can be adverse consequences of it. And very often I don't think that everybody understands that there can be the adverse consequences that you mentioned. So if you think that every consultant in the country only ever recommends label rates and every farmer only uses label rates, then that's great. I'll be very glad to be wrong, Belinda.
Steve, well, I'll open it up for comment from the rest of the panel, but I've just got one little blue post-it here, which is in your bag while you're mic'd up. Does spot spraying increase spray drift?
Well, does spot spraying, again, it's going to be, I think I had a couple of discussions, I think we're going to see a lot more precision agriculture. That was not me. Precision agriculture spot spraying, as I said earlier. But there's also a whole lot of questions in that. And a lot of work that will need to occur. Like, what are the right nozzles? What is the potential? Are you only spraying 5% of a paddock or 50%? So there's still a lot of those questions which need addressing. But in principle, I think the answer is there is going to be a reduced risk for spray drift from many applications of precision application, but it won't always be the case. And I'm getting a sardonic look here. So why don't you explain why that look?
I probably should do the calculation on spot sprayers. So yes, we are using less product, but we have 2016 technology with a 1960s nozzle on it. We have a massive plume of fines that comes out. So if you wanted to do the maths on a full boom spray, putting out less than 1% to, let's say, 6 nozzles firing, putting out 17%, with not a standard hectare rate in it, we have rocket fuel coming out of that. So your concentration of your product and the droplets is much higher. So the other thing is that it's slow, and so they go on 24/7. So it has the potential to reduce drift. Is it at the moment? I don't bloody think so.
I'll grab this one. So I think, just to add to that, I think the answer is really it depends on the setup. But certainly just going to spot spraying and thinking you're going to reduce drift, no, that won't do it, because all you've got to do is get online and watch some of the videos and just look at what's happening. So I think that what we need to do with spot spraying is we actually need to develop new nozzles that are designed for spot spraying. And if we get that space, we'll be right.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, I'm really working through the post-its. Thank you for doing that. That's worked really nicely. Another one I've got for the panel up here is about industry capacity. And this question says, how or is industry addressing the lapse in capacity, appropriate expertise within APVMA? This is leading to bottlenecks and poor direction. So there's the question. What do you think?
Look, so let's start with the bright side, and both Steve and Chris made this point before. Like, we are a country that has science-based regulation of product, and that's such an important part, because otherwise we end up with, firstly, political positions about what should be used and what shouldn't be used, to the point where, like, there are minutes of European parliamentary committees saying that we will not approve import tolerances of stuff that we no longer have authorised in Europe, despite the fact it's safe to eat at those levels. So and to be fair, that's in violation of a whole bunch of treaties, but let's not worry about that. In terms of capability, there's been a range of work within the legislative framework of the APVMA over a number of years, which means that they have no excuse for not delivering assessments on time. They are able to use expert scientific consultants to undertake that assessment, but they have not grappled that opportunity. And so we are frustrated, and our industry is frustrated around the fact that there are delays that are happening. They, for the last year and a half, more than 1 in 10 products has not hit the assessment timeframes, despite the fact that they have a legislation that enables them to use expert scientific consultants and online computer decision making. And we have had a number of conversations with the APVMA executive around these opportunities, and we continue to wait for that. So again, we will continue to make that push. Obviously, Minister Watt has 2 reviews on his desk right now in terms of the future of the APVMA. Look, we are confident in the discussions that we've been having with the APVMA itself that there's a way forward from that should mean they can move forward without damaging or further damaging Australia's reputation, because let's face it, Stephen talked about the price and the length of bringing a product to market, and it's almost 12 and a half years from discovery through to product registered in a big marketplace. Australia is not a big marketplace. In fact, we're roughly 1 to 2% of the world's global chemical use, and that means that they don't get a lot of money out of Australia. And so we need an assessment time frame that's predictable so they can actually plan their expenditure and marketing around it. We've been talking to our members and they're trying to bring really novel and important chemistry to Australia, and they are missing seasons. When they're missing seasons, that's an extra year that they actually won't make a return on, which makes Australia look like a place they just don't want to do business. And whilst the competition between our members here in Australia is fierce, we always say the fiercest competition in the crop protection market is between the head of an Australian company and the head of Bayer or Syngenta or FMC here in Australia versus Bayer or Syngenta or FMC in Latin America. And I can tell you where head office is releasing investment to commercialise right now.
Thank you. Now, I've just looked at the time. It is 16 past, so that does bring our panel session to an end. I've got two things that I need to do to finish wrapping up the day. Firstly, I'd love from the 4 people on the panel, I just would like 1 or 2 take-home messages from the day. So I'll give you a moment to think about that while I give everyone on the tables my next little instruction. We have put 2 bits of paper on each table. They say, what actions or changes will you make from today? And the other one says, what are your key learnings for the day? I'm actually, once I've heard from our panel speakers, I'd like you to spend 5 minutes talking with your table. And I'd like someone to write some points down, and then I'm going to pick 3 tables to share them with the day to wrap things up. On these pieces of paper, you can also write any questions, because I saw there were 2 hands up for final questions. I'm sorry, we've run out of time for more questions, but you can write them on the paper and we will get them chased up. So I'd like some learnings for the day, any actions that you would like GPSA to do. If you've got any ideas for what needs to be next, pop them down. But before we have our last discussion for the day, team, what are your take-homes? If we are to walk out of here and go, yep, I learnt something new, what do you want them to take home? Justin?
2 take-homes. One is on the farm. And that, I'm probably going to steal Steve's position here, and that is follow the label. Get yourself upskilled. And then as an industry, is my second take-home, is an industry we need to create a culture where that's the norm. And so that, we have the support climate so farm businesses will, create the culture of doing the right thing.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, my 2, firstly, I'd like to thank Nick Hillier for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to spend the day today with old friends and meet some new people in South Australian agriculture. So thanks, Nick. In terms of learnings, I would have thought that for some of you, there's been a lot of complex issues discussed today, and therefore work out how to keep it simple for yourself. And the main way of keeping it simple is follow the label. It cuts out a lot of the complexity, so follow the label. Belinda.
It's a clear message, isn't it? Thank you. Chris?
I think, just thinking about what we've heard today, I'm going to have a really positive message, and I think that actually as an industry we can do this. We can solve this problem. Most of the tools we need are there. Perhaps we need to invent 1 or 2 more, but most of the things we need are there. It's just doing them right. And I did in my talk deliberately focus on the pre-emergent herbicide space, because doing it right there is not only good in terms of not having product move off farm, but it's actually good practice if you want to get the most out of those products to control your weeds. And I did talk a couple of weeks ago, and somebody asked me about something, and I said, look, I'm just interested in killing ryegrass. We really want to maximise our ability to get pre-emergent herbicides to work. The rules are really simple, and a lot of it's just making sure that it's down on the target.
Thanks, Chris. And Mary?
I'll go back to a question that Tom Wolfe posed to me in the States when we were looking at all the dicamba dramas. And he said, I've just had a question from a lady and she said, how do we use this product and not drift it? And Tom said, I don't know what to say to her. I said, that's easy. Leave it in the drum. And he just laughed. He's like, that is actually true. So every single thing in relation to spray drift is in your control. It all comes down to the decisions you make. Chemicals in drums don't drift. It only happens when you start applying it. So instead of, when you're under the pump thinking about today's job and how the hell am I going to get this job done today, think about in 10 years' time, and you want to use that same product, will you still be able to? Because the decisions you make today about this application will determine whether you can use that product in 10 years' time. So every single thing about drift is in your control.
Awesome. Big round of applause for our panel. Thank you sincerely, team. Okay, so I'm going to let you talk for 4 minutes. So the process from here is we're just going to have a quick chat. I want to hear any key take-home, something that you're going to go, I'm going to go home and change this. It doesn't, I just want a few points. Anything that you want GPSA to action, I'd like you to write down. And then we're going to hear from Chair John Gladigo. Are you wrapping up the day? I will. Yep, good. And so we will finish on time. You've got 4 minutes to discuss. We'll then hear from John. And go. Just being conscious of time, I'm going to pop around to a few tables. Anthony, I can see your writing over here. This is exciting. TMAG Extra, you got anything? I can read them out. What actions or changes will you make? Better record keeping. And what are your key learnings? Understanding the label, follow the label. And stick to label rates. Beautiful. We're happy with that? Okay. Over here, what have we got? Any quick things? The key learnings from the day, moved on from delta T, increased understanding inversion, e.g. windy inversion. Beautiful, thank you. And actions or changes. I like this one, helping neighbours understand about inversions. What a great take home. Okay, I'm coming over to this table. Oh, look at this, what have we got over here? What actions or changes will you make? So over here they've said nozzle setup, more water, larger drops, no spraying under inversions, utilise weather stations all year round, follow the label, ×2, different types of inversions and the effect of wind are the key learnings, and more water, larger drops. How good is this? We've got some awesome learnings happening over here. What about over here? Peter, are you writing? Oh, look at this. Okay, Peter. Key learnings are allocate more time to drift in my chemical records. Would strongly suggest APVMA having mandatory time limitations for new products, applications or emerging purchases.
If the APVMA can fast track both new product applications and emergency permits, we can have an expanded toolkit and basically ensure that we can better prevent spray drift through new models. But the APVMA in its charter was challenged some years ago to expand its charter and incorporate economic impact, and that was a real big thing. Here, Pete.
Yeah, so the APMA lost a lot of people when they shifted to Armidale. A lot of them pulled out, so it got further behind. But the other one I got here is just get rid of delta T as a spray inclusion. It's just a waste of time. It's causing more problems than anything else.
Thank you for reading it out for me too. That's well done, team. Over here, and this is, over here. What have you got, James? Okay, key learnings are spray calculators for true droplet size. Do 2 preceding passes, less in tank. Slow down, keep an eye on boom height. Record keeping will save your bum. And what actions or changes will you make? Have this workshop with the ChemCert workshop with vouchers like your spray pledge. Start conversations about how much they know about their nozzles. Awesome. Has anyone got anything different that we haven't had yet? I wasn't going to go around to all tables, but anything different you want to share? All right, good. Well, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to wrap up and hand it over to John. But from my end, thank you so much for keeping the energy up. Thanks so much for your positive contributions. I'm going to collect those bits of paper and feed them back to GPSA about the key learnings, because that's really valuable to hear. Thank you for all your questions and your post-it notes, and thanks for having me as part of your day. John, over to you to wrap up.
Thanks, Belinda, and I know I'm between you and a beer, so I won't be very long, but thank you for all the... Pardon? Safe travelling with beer. I'm getting the word from Belinda, so I'll say that now. So remember, when you have the beers, be safe travelling as you go home. But thank you all for attending today. I think it's been a wonderful day, and I think one of the big positives actually is that we're having a much more positive discussion around chemical stewardship and spray drift, and people are coming along. The fact we had 150 people here today, that there were 3 really well-attended workshops on the York Peninsula last week as well, and I think more people are becoming aware of the issues, and I think that's fantastic, and I think that's a real great take-home. Hope you've learned a lot today, and certainly from a GPSA level, it's been really, really valuable for us. I think being here in the room and getting a feel of where people are at, there's a lot that we're going to take away from this and discuss around the board table, and also within the ranks of GPSA, and so that's been really great. And rest assured that spray drift chemical stewardship remains an absolute priority for GPSA, and we certainly know that it is for its members, so we certainly won't be letting it drop off in any way. We talked a bit about social licence today, and I mean social licence is the trust that the community has in us to go about doing our business. And if that trust is lost, it's really hard to repair and it's really hard to replace. And I think we build that trust by being open and transparent. And what today was all about was an open and transparent discussion on a really tough topic. And so the challenge is for us is to take what we've learned today, to take it back into our own businesses, share it with our friends, our neighbours and our communities, so that we can continue to build that trust as well. Thanks to all of our speakers. I won't go through and name you all, but it's been so wonderful to have you travel from right across the country to participate today. You wouldn't find a much higher calibre of speakers on this topic anywhere in the country, and I think it's just been a fantastic and a great learning experience. One final thing is, can you, together with me, thank Belinda Kay for the fantastic job she did. Certainly is just a fantastic facilitator, and probably the envy of the rest of the country, I think, in a day like today, to be able to draw the type of questions and information out of people. Thanks, Belinda, you're just wonderful and a great asset to us as an industry. So be safe. So go have a couple of beers, or a beer. There's probably a bit of food left there as well, and have a safe trip home, and hope all goes well for a wonderful season this year. It's going to rain soon. We're all going to go spraying, but let's do it in a safe way, and if you can't keep the spray in your paddock, keep it in a drum.